Symfony comes with a security component that's really powerful. Honestly, it's also really complex. It can connect with other authentication systems like Facebook or LDAP or load user information from anywhere, like a database or even across an API. The bummer is that hooking all this up can be tough, but since you'll know how each piece works, you'll be able to do amazing things. There's also some Jedi magic I'll show you later that makes custom authentication systems much easier. Security is two parts: authentication and authorization. Authentication checks the user's credentials. Its job is not to restrict access. It just wants to know who you are. Okay, so think of a building, or maybe even the Death Star. After the tractor beam forces you to land, you'll walk out and pass through a security checkpoint. Both stormtroopers and rebels check in here, prove who they are, and receive an access card, or a token in Symfony speak. Proving who you are and getting a token, that's authentication. The token can be used to unlock doors in this fully armed and operational battle station. Everyone inside has a token, but some grant more access than others. The second part of security, authorization, is like the lock that's on every door. It actually denies a user access to something. Authorization doesn't care if you're Obi-Wan or a stormtrooper. It only checks to see if the token you received has enough access to enter a specific room. Let's talk authentication first, which can be more complex than authorization. The security configuration lives entirely in the app-config security.yaml file, which is imported from the main config.yaml file. Security config lives in its own file because, well, it's kind of big and ugly. But there's no technical reason. You could move all of this into config.yaml and it would work just the same. Find the firewalls key. It's the most important part in this file. A firewall represents the authentication layer or security checkpoint for your app. Delete the login and dev firewall sections so that we just have one. Just like in a giant floating death machine, it makes sense for everyone to pass through the same security system that looks up people in the same corrupt Imperial database. In fact, change the pattern key to be /. Now, every request that goes to our app will use this one firewall for authentication. Let's also change the login path key to be /my-login-url. Don't worry about what this is or what any of the other keys mean yet. They're just there to confuse you. I'll explain it all in a second. Now, uncomment the anonymous key. This lets anonymous users into the site, similar to letting a tourist enter the Death Star. We may want to require login for certain pages, or even maybe nearly every page. But we're not going to do that here. Remember, the firewall is all about finding out who you are, not denying access. Head back to the browser, but don't refresh. First, notice the little red icon on your web debug toolbar. When you hover over it, it says, "You are not authenticated." Now refresh. Yes, it's green and says Anon. Clicking it shows us that we're now authenticated. Yeah, it's a bit odd, but anonymous users are actually authenticated since they pass through our firewall. But don't panic. It's easy in code to check if the user is actually logged in or not. I'll show you that later. Of course, we haven't actually done the work to make it possible to log in yet, but we'll get to those silly details in a second.